Hey there, art nerds. Today we're going to be easily influenced by Lacey Walker, aka the Rebel Unicorn. She is a short form video content creator. She is an art educator, she is an artist, and she is quite popular on sites like Instagram Reels and TikTok. She does these phenomenal little short form art tutorials. So if you're looking for a little quick bite of some art inspiration, I highly recommend her work. Today we're going to be checking out one of her watercolor palettes from her shop. We're going to be checking out some of her handmade watercolors, which are no longer available. I waited too long. And we are going to be checking out her book, Learn to Watercolor in this book. We're going to be putting everything through the paces. We are going to be swatching, we are going to be painting, and we are going to be talking about the Rebel Unicorn today. So I hope you guys are as excited as I am. It's been a while since we've done an easily influenced, and this one has been sitting around for a while. So this is Rebel Unicorn stuff. This is her book. And then these are some of her paints. And I feel kind of bad that things have been kind of waiting around, but I've been working on other projects, working on a game with my spouse, working on my Louisiana food series. So, you know, I think I had a good reason for things to take a while. So inside this box, in fact, it's been so long that I kind of remember what's in here, but I kind of don't. Actually, it is more closed than I thought it was. So let me use the entirely wrong cutter to slit the sides. And Bowie in the background would like to say hi and remind you guys to subscribe if you're not subscribed yet, and to check out some of the other videos in my Easily Influenced series. And if you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. The Easily Influenced series is where I take a look at influential artists and art influencers. I check out their books, I check out their products, and we talk about them together to help you guys figure out if they're a good fit for your artistic needs. So inside the box is an invoice, and in 2023, so it's been a while, I ordered the Handmade watercolor sample bag with 10 samples and the new and improved Unicorn Food starter watercolor set, Perfect Bite. And the grab bag was $9 and the watercolor starter set was $36. So this has been sitting around for a while. Hopefully everything's okay though. So we have here a little cute mini flyer about getting started with watercolor as well as getting started with landscapes. We have a sample black sand beach, which looks like it's got some mica to it. We have another sample called Magic Spell, which is kind of a beautiful golden color. And then inside we have our handmade samples. So it is a grab bag. It's going to be a random selection. I'm going to add these 2 additional samples to the grab bag just to keep everything together. And that actually looks like it might be more than 10 samples in there. And then inside we have the watercolor kit. And we have her branded watercolor sketchbook. I am going to point out though, as a denizen of AliExpress, I have seen these sketchbooks around a lot over there. So I do think it is kind of like a relabeled product. That doesn't make it not good. It's just, you know, information to know. So we also have her book, and if you have watched the Easily Influenced series, you might notice I'm doing things a little bit differently this time than I normally do. One, I want to keep the book review really succinct, like 5 minutes or so, but also this watercolor book actually comes with sketches that we can paint in the bag. So I kind of love this because I know a lot of people are interested in watercolor, but they are not confident in their drawing skills. And this is a great way to be able to practice your watercolor without having to know how to draw. And then on this side is our how-to book. So what I kind of wanted to do was I wanted to go through the book, and what I will probably do is read all of it myself, and then I will pick a project, and then I kind of wanted to work on the project with you guys, and that'll give me a real chance to actually talk about how good the instruction is, how much it correlates. And I was planning on using the Unicorn Food Perfect Bite set of 12 watercolors to actually try painting it. So I have my own brushes. I'll be bringing those to the table, as well as my own palettes, but I'm pretty excited about this. There's not a lot of, so this is a mass market book. It was produced by Walter and Foster, and I grew up reading Walter and Foster art books. They actually had or that might have been Guptill that had the perspective book that I really liked. But anyway, Walter and Foster is a pretty common name in art books. We've talked a lot about like Page Street and Quattro here. Walter and Foster does things a little bit differently. So I'm kind of excited to see how this is going to compare to some of the other painting books that we've talked about. But this one is kind of unusual because now some of the books that we've reviewed in the past did have like templates in the back. Some of the Handmade books that we've taken a look at, those actually are basically like coloring books with instruction. This kind of falls into that category. And I really like this concept because I feel like it makes watercolor very accessible. So I am looking forward to being easily influenced by Rebel Unicorn Crafts today. It looks like there are a lot of really cute watercolor projects in here. I may do more than just one, but for context, hi, hello, welcome. I'm Becca Hilburn. I'm a watercolor comic artist, illustrator, and art educator. I make the comics 7-inch Kara, which you can read at 7inchkara.com. And I also love using watercolor for illustration. I'm going to provide some examples here in case you are brand new to my work. And if you enjoy my work and would like to keep up with what I'm doing, then I hope you will consider following me at Nattosoup, Nattosoup. So I have a lot of experience with watercolor. I'm actually like trying to do the math here, and I think I first started to get into it in 2010, 2011. One of my friends while I was at grad school was an amazing, still is, and we're still friends, an amazing watercolor illustrator, and just being in their orbit really inspired me to pick up watercolor. Surprisingly, I did not learn how to watercolor while I was at SCAD. My friend taught me. So I was taught by my friend, but not through SCAD. And I also learned via the internet. So through blogs, through Blick's wonderful instructions, and through a boatload of trial and error. So I have been painting with watercolor for about 13 years now. And I've also been teaching watercolor both through my blog, which is now defunct, as well as here on YouTube and occasionally on TikTok. So I'm really excited to see how Lacey Walker has, like, how our approaches to teaching watercolor and the kind of watercolor projects that we come up with differ. I know sometimes I can be kind of salty, but I actually really like Lacey's work. I've been following her on Instagram for a while, and I believe also on TikTok, but I might be wrong about that. I might be thinking of Reels. And she just has like a really fun, charming personality. So today we are going to be looking at her social media presence a little bit, and we are going to be picking at least one project to do together in time lapse, and I will do voice narration on top of it. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave you guys totally in a lurch, but I did want to give you guys some background context about the kind of work that I do, because we both work in watercolor and we have very, very different approaches to watercolor, which I think is wonderful. That's why I enjoy reviewing watercolor books, is I'm still learning. You learn throughout your life. It is a forever process. And I really love when art education is made affordable, accessible, and something that people can do on their own time. Because like I said, that was how I learned how to watercolor, was a boatload of trial and error. So I am really excited about cracking into Learn to Watercolor. I love how approachable the projects are. That definitely takes kind of the burden of like drawing and the burden of like looking at the blank page and feeling overly intimidated. It removes that burden, and I love that. I love anything that makes art more accessible and approachable to more people, because it is my goal to help you guys make art a habit. So I haven't read the whole book because I want to do a few of the projects with you guys, but I did read the front of the book, and then after we do a few projects, we'll kind of swing back. So Walter Foster seems to be owned by Quattro, and I wonder when Quattro bought them, because Walter Foster is an old brand and has been around for a long time. It is hard. Okay, so this is kind of an unwieldy setup since they are connected. It's not just a folder that holds both, with the main book part of the book being over here. So when fully open, I guess you could sling this back, but I'd be worried about getting the watercolor paper dirty while you travel. So it's hard to keep this part of the book open, since there's no sturdy cover for this part. There is a sturdy cover here, but even having like an overlapping, I know it's a lot of waste, and I'm sure it's a pain in the butt to publish, but it's hard to keep it open. Spiral binding might have also allowed for easier access to the spreads. So all of the projects in this book look very accessible and very cute. You also receive digital copies of the line arts to print out on your preferred paper, which is what I do with my coloring book, because we can't always control the kind of papers that we have. And it will also, and by that I mean who our publishers or our printers want to use, it also allows you to try these techniques out on cotton rag paper. She mentions that cellulose paper, which I'm assuming is what's included with the book, and cotton rag paper handle a little bit differently. And they do. So I like that. I think that was very thoughtful. There's also QR codes that link to video tutorials that provide demonstrations. And I really like this. I like multimodal teaching, and I like that this may allow her to utilize her own backlog of content, which is pretty substantial. So I think that's pretty smart. She mentions that she uses the supplies that she sells on her site. So it seems like I am prepared for this book. But on page 9, she does list out her preferred paints and their brands. So Burnt Sienna, Mission Gold, Payne's Gray Core, Permanent Yellow Deep Shinhan, Phthalo Blue, Winsor Newton Cotman, Prussian Blue, Mission Gold, Quinacridone Magenta, Winsor Newton, Sap Green, Winsor Newton, Vermilion, Mission Gold, Yellow Ochre, number 1, Mission Gold. Now on page 14, she actually has a demo of how she sets up her workspace, which I really appreciate, because it is so rare to see this in art books, even from artists who record for YouTube and probably have a load of examples handy. So I really appreciate that. Now, in the main explanation part of the book, she spends some time explaining basic terms, basic techniques, and provides adequate examples in the book, as well as QR codes to see them in action, which I think is great for artists who are just learning watercolor and need that additional help. A lot of her examples in the front section are from the projects that are actually in the book, which gets you excited about the projects and is a handy reference for that exact project. I really like that. She takes time to explain basic color theory, which I appreciate, because a lot of books skip over that and assume that you already have it, or they go over it super briefly, like just enough to get you kind of confused. She does a better job of explaining it Her projects all seem to be designed to reinforce basic skills, as well as create attractive art that you could display if you wish. And as a teacher, I really like those kind of projects. It's generally what I strive to do when I'm creating in-person projects that I'm going to teach. So it's very in line with the way I also like to handle things. So makes it easy to recommend when it's very in line with the way that I like to do things. So very few complaints. Anyway, I have marked off several projects that I would like to try with you guys. Like I said before, doing them in time lapse. I don't know if I'm going to do all of them because I did mark off several, but I think that's a great sign too, because there's several projects that I think would be fun and would be exciting and that you guys would be interested in. And it is, let's see, I think there's like 20 projects in this book. It is by far not 20. And my goal is not to spoil this book for you guys, but rather to help you guys decide if this would be a good fit for you and for your learning style, how you would like to pursue watercolor. Now, before I forget, the MSRP is $24.99. I purchased this on Amazon a while back. In fact, I pre-ordered this when I saw her advertising it on her Instagram. I got pretty excited about it. Like I said, I follow her work, and this is how much I ended up paying for it. Before I get into the projects though, I do want to take a look at the watercolor set that I purchased from her, and I will be swatching the little handmade paints at some point as well. So this is Unicorn Food Perfect Bite, set of 12 watercolors by Rebel Unicorn Crafts. This was manufactured in China. I actually don't know who she's white labeling these from. I bet I could guess once we start painting with them, because I have played around with so many inexpensive white label watercolors here on the channel over the years. At first I was thinking it would be Mungyo like Josie Lewis's set was, but we will find out. So in this set we have our swatches. I do wish, for the sake of consistency, because her book refers to color names like that paint manufacturers tend to like burnt sienna, but these all have what I like to think of as like funsy, cutesy, makeup-y names, which can make it harder if you're less familiar with watercolor. It can make it harder for you to know which colors are what. So I do wish she had like included maybe the real name, or I say real, you know what I mean, the common name or the pigment information. But since I think she is white labeling these from another company, she may not have had access to that. So we also have room to swatch our watercolors on what feels like watercolor paper. And then we have some color labels. I guess you could cut them out and apply them directly to your watercolor pans. I do wish they were pre-scored. That would be a little easier, but she's a small business, so I understand. These look like semi-art. I don't know if they're semi-art. These look like semi-art. And they also got a little out of order, and they are very dusty. I'm honestly a little disappointed. Of all the Chinese brands she could have white labeled from, semi-art, as those of you who watch the channel know, is my absolute least favorite. She could have gone with Superior, she could have gone with Phoenix, and I would have been excited about that. Possibly could have even gone with Mei Liang, although I kind of doubt it. It seems like Paul Rubens is handling a lot of their own stuff these days. But semi-art is my nemesis, my least favorite. And like I said, let's see, I think these are out of order. No, maybe not. They may go this way. I'm that person. I'm really particular about making sure that my colors line up. I think this is guacamole. This might be black licorice. So if these are semi-art, I'll just be honest with you, I personally would prefer not to do the projects in her book using semi-art paints. Again, those of you who have watched the channel, y'all know why. It is a contentious thing for me. So what I may do, if I feel like these are semi-art paints, I may switch this out, grab like a Mungyo palette, which is not my favorite, but I prefer, or maybe even grab a similar Phoenix watercolor palette, like the Zen Art palette, they white label from Phoenix, just so that I'm working with a student grade paint that I actually like and I think would work for the projects that she's demonstrating, because knowing what I know about semi art and how the pigments themselves, or they're not even pigments, they're dye-based watercolors, how the paints themselves handle, I do not think I will be capable of accomplishing some of the techniques. Boy, this book really is unwieldy. Some of the techniques that are shown in the book, I just don't, and I know she uses this on her channel, she can do it, okay? I just feel like I will be fighting with the paints to get some of these techniques. So if these are semi-art paints, I am going to sub them for something that I like better. These are the backup sets that I might use. These are Artify watercolors, but they're actually Superior brand watercolors. So that's another Chinese company, fairly affordable. Lots of people like to white label from them. I have experience with this product, so in general, I like them. It'll be another excuse to use them. So decent color selection. This is a 24 color set. It should have the colors that she talks about in the book. And that will allow me, instead of like being annoyed at the paints and not being able to focus on the instruction, switching over to a student grade brand that I like will allow me to just focus on the instruction for the books. We are going to talk about these paints though. And then Winsor Newton Cotman, there's strong belief that these are Phoenix watercolors under a white label. And I didn't want to pull out my big Phoenix set because I would spend all my time looking for the right colors. And I have reviews both for the Artify set and the Winsor Newton Cotman set. Sorry, I'm having a bad all-through-good day, so I may struggle to open some things. But these seem to be Phoenix watercolors. It is a 12 color set other than the white, which is basically useless to me. So I will probably pick one of these two sets, leaning towards the Artify set. Again, just so that I can focus on the instruction itself rather than griping about the watercolors. Especially because while in the book she says she uses her brand of paints, they didn't come together. This was purchased from her shop a while back. So she may have switched providers since, and I just didn't buy a new set. So I'm trying to be as fair as possible here. So I think we ought to go ahead and get into these watercolors. And this kit also came with a watercolor sketchbook. This is supposedly, it says it is 100% cotton. Ready to get creatively curious, perfect for all of your mini creative desires, perfect for watercolor, but also works great with pencil, pen, or even acrylic paint. This is also manufactured in China. This looks like a potentate sketchbook, which I've never gotten to try a potentate sketchbook, so that was why I was willing to give it a shot here, because it actually looked like something I'd been thinking about. I guess it's a cotton rag paper. It doesn't really feel like one, but I think I will be able to tell once I get some paint on this. So, sturdy little watercolor sketchbook, and then here are our paints. So in the past, I've made this whole production of like fully testing out watercolors that I buy from art influencers and influential artists, but I am trying to keep these easily influenced videos a little bit shorter and a little bit more digestible. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to swatch on their sheet, I'm going to swatch over here and try to determine how I feel about these watercolors and whether or not I think they're semi-art, and that will allow us to progress on to the project part of this easily influenced. So does that sound good? Hopefully, yes. If these are different from what I expected, like leagues better than what I'm expecting, then I may revise that statement, or I may come back and do a field test at another point in time. But right now, they're really giving me semi-art vibes, so I'm just going to kind of roll with that assumption until proven otherwise.
The color is activated readily and easily with no pre-activation needed. The colors are saturated but feel kind of flat. There's no granulation or any interesting color effects to them. They have kind of a very uniform feel regardless of the color that I'm swatching. These are taking a while to dry because it's raining outside, but we're not seeing any granulation, even from colors that might typically. Like this is kind of a mauve. Often we would get some granulation from a mauve. This is like sort of like a yellow ochre. It really kind of feels more like an olive green. Normally with this is kind of like a phthalo blue, but it might be trying to be an ultramarine blue. It's hard to tell, actually. It'd be strange if she didn't give us a warm blue with all the talk of color theory, but no granulation here, no granulation in blueberry muffin, no granulation in, so normally a burnt sienna wouldn't necessarily have granulation, but a burnt umber would. Not seeing that with that either, and no granulation with black licorice. Now, I will caveat, different brands grind their pigments to different levels. Like Holbein is very finely milled, Turner is very finely milled. But usually when I don't see granulation in my watercolors, I start to think that they might be dye-based and not pigment-based. So I'm gonna swap this out for the adorable little book. Now, do I care that she is white labeling watercolors? Absolutely not. As a small business that just doesn't have access to their own manufacturing, I would expect her to white label her own watercolors. Mungyo is a popular choice. I just am not a fan of Semi-Art. I've butted heads with that brand before, and that's kind of the vibe that I'm picking up here, but I don't always hate them. The Hannah MP collaboration really had me kind of rethinking how I felt about dye-based watercolors. So it's not necessarily an all is lost sort of situation, but as a consumer, as someone who purchases watercolor books, watercolor supplies, I like to know what I'm getting and I like to know what I'm paying for. And I think having that kind of information, and I'm not blaming the Rebel Unicorn at all for this. I'm more talking about the company that she may be purchasing these from should be more clear about how these watercolors are manufactured so that she can then pass that information along to her customers. The swatching experience was similar in this book, although I will say I did like the feedback that the paper in this book provided and think it's a fun little watercolor sketchbook that I'll be playing around with more. I do think the paper in this book is cotton rag. That's why I chose it for my second set of swatches, and I'd hope that it would reflect the colors better, but unfortunately my issues remain the same. So since this is a cotton rag paper, and since we're not going to be doing a full review of the paints as a standalone, but we are, well, we'll see. I'm still kind of debating whether or not I want to use these paints for the projects or if I want to work with something that I'm more familiar with and more comfortable with. So still trying to make that decision, but I did figure we would go ahead and do a small wet into wet test, which is something that I commonly do when I'm reviewing watercolors here in the sketchbook. Now, this ought to tell us a few different things. Usually when I'm doing wet into wet tests, I am doing all of my review on Blick Studio cotton rag paper just for consistency's sake. This is a little bit different, right? It's a different product. So it's not going to be one-to-one, but if it is a cotton rag paper, we should ideally see it should soak into the paper nicely. It shouldn't just sit on top of the paper. It should allow colors to bloom and mix effortlessly or fairly effortlessly, depending on how thick we dab them on. For the watercolors, some colors should be transparent, some colors should be opaque. She talks about that in the book itself. Those are qualities that we want to see from even decent student grade paint, you should be able to have opaque colors and transparent colors. You should have granulating colors and staining colors. Like, different pigments have different properties, and that's one of the reasons I'm personally not super keen on dye-based watercolors. Is for me, they all seem to feel kind of flat, but a lot of artists like those kind of watercolors because they can be very luminous and they can be very saturated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go get another cup of clean water, saturate the page, and then start dipping in paint. For wet into wet, colors diffuse nicely and easily, although some color is lost with wet into wet. I'm seeing a little granulation from Blueberry Muffin, the one that looks like a Prussian blue, and maybe a little granulation from Plum, the one that looks like a mauve. I'm still trying to decide if I want to use her watercolors for the book or superior student grade watercolors. I may try the first project with hers and see how I feel. So I'm still kind of on the fence about these watercolors. What I think I might do is I might use her watercolors for one of the first projects that I paint, see how I feel, and if I'm like frustrated by the watercolors or feel like working with them is distracting me from being able to assess the quality of the projects and the teaching, I'll switch over to paints that I'm more comfortable with, and that'll allow me to give a more fair assessment. So next, I want to try out the Handmade watercolors that I purchased, and these are just little dot samples, and I like that because it keeps it a little bit more affordable for me, since all of this was purchased out of pocket, ostensibly using funds from my Patreon, but also quite possibly using funds from teaching. So the samples arrived in this cute little bag. Remember, she did send 2 additional samples. I kind of just mixed them in. And it looks like I have a duplicate, not a big deal. But it also looks like these are, oh no, okay. We have one that isn't mica based. We have another that isn't mica based. I was worried that they would be all mica based, but we have 2 that are not. The rest of them are. Now, I'm not going to just dunk on mica based watercolors, but they're not my preference because I like to work for reproduction. I make watercolor comics. So they just don't scan very well. They're good though for originals, like commissions that people are buying to add just like a little fun extra flair. So I sorted them out. I feel like I know this paper, the bluest watercolor paper I've ever reviewed before. I kind of sorted them out into mica based and not mica based. I'm just going to work my way through them. As mentioned, I got a couple duplicates, which isn't a big deal since she'd thrown in a couple for free. I do wish I'd gotten more non-shimmery colors because I feel like it's hard for me to judge the quality of watercolors when they're mica based, but they all reactivated easily and seem pretty creamy, particularly Spellbound. These are still drying, but I'm about to head out of the house. So I wanted to share my notes before I forgot because I have ADHD and I will not remember what I did or did not say. That's why I repeat myself so much. So I got a couple of duplicates. which isn't really a big deal. She did throw in 2 freebies, so you know. I wish I'd gotten more non-shimmery colors because I feel like it's hard for me to judge the quality of watercolors when they're mica based. But these all reactivated easily and seem pretty creamy, particularly Spellbound, which seems to be, we will know after it is dried, it seems to be a really nice creamy coppery color. Less impressive though is Magic Spell, and honestly that's one of the reasons why I avoid metallic mica based watercolors, is they just never have as much oomph as a metallic gouache or just a straight up metallic paint. So that's one of the reasons I'm not really big on them. I did enjoy Vegetation, Stargazer Lily, and Eggplant, and I feel like Eggplant is like, a couple of these colors kind of feel like they're not in this palette. This palette was manufactured in China, but I can see like the appeal for some of these colors and why she picked some of these colors when working with her manufacturer. I return several hours later. We can see our watercolors have dried. I really like, there's like an undertone of hot pink in Eggplant that I don't think my camera is doing a good job picking up on, but it's actually rather pretty in regular life. So I was digging through some of my student grade watercolors and I found 2 sets that I feel like are possibly comparable to this set here. So this guy, and I did want to I do want to swatch them for you guys. Let's see, hopefully I'll have enough room for it. I was actually looking for another set that I have and that I've talked about here on the channel as part of my Easily Influenced series, and I couldn't find it. And honestly, it might be for the best that I didn't find this set. I might be poking the bear if I found that set. So, you know, maybe that's my guardian angel looking out for me. But I do have the Grabby 12 watercolors set, and this is from one of their subscription boxes that they sent me to talk about here on the channel. So these kind of reminded me of this Grabby set. The colors are different, but how the paints handle is what really reminded me of it. But also, I kept saying semi-art. This is one of my multiple semi-art sets, and this is one of the large ones. This is like a 98 color set. So what I would like to do, I'm not going to swatch all of this for you guys. You guys can watch the video where I do that, where I review it. But I wanted to kind of cherry pick some of the colors from this set that are kind of similar to some of the colors from this set and do some side-by-side or on the same page swatches. When comparing the Rebel Unicorn watercolors against semi-art, and I'm going to re-swatch the Rebel Unicorn watercolors so that we have like our in-page comparison, and then I'll swatch against the marked semi-art colors as well as all of the Grabby colors. So I noticed a lot of similarities, there's a lot of shared colors and a lot of common properties. Companies that offer white labeling will also sometimes offer custom or customizable color palettes. Some of these companies start as low as 1,000 units over on Alibaba. I did notice that the Grabby are weaker and less saturated and don't offer as much color impact, although their yellow ochre is closer to a real yellow ochre than what we have here. So now I am swatching the semi-art watercolors and trying to put them as close to the Rebel Unicorn watercolors as possible so that we have a more one-to-one sort of comparison and it's easier for you guys to be able to visually compare the colors. Now, this doesn't mean anything definitive. Some companies just use common formulas, but it does kind of give me a point of comparison of watercolors that I'm not really that happy with and don't really like painting with, and, you know, tendencies that I would prefer to avoid with watercolor. And then finally, I'm going to swatch the Grabby watercolors. Those are the ones up there. If you guys are curious, I do have full reviews for all of these. If you just like to geek out about art supplies like I do, or if you're looking for some friendly background company, I've been told that my reviews make great company while you're working on your own art. And like I said, they're just not as saturated, and these are kind of more of a muted color selection. There seems to be a lot of similarities between Art and the Rebel Unicorn watercolors. There's a lot of shared colors as well as a lot of common properties. The way the paint handles on the paper, there's several colors where it's really, really similar. Now, that doesn't make it 100% Art. That's just my best guess. And companies that offer white labeling will also sometimes offer custom or customizable color palettes. Some of these companies start as low as 1,000 units over on Alibaba. So it is a very feasible way to kind of manufacture your own watercolors from an existing company. The Grabby palette is weaker, less saturated, and they don't offer as much color impact as the Art, although their yellow ochre, in fact, that dried really pastel. Their yellow ochre is still closer to a real yellow ochre than, she calls it banana split, but Art calls it yellow ochre. That's really more like a goldenrod or an Indian yellow sort of yellow. So let's start actually watercoloring. Let's pick some projects and get to painting. I have my first kind of problem. So for this pad, sorry, I just don't have enough hands to hold the book open and also flip to the page. For the first exercise I want to do, it's this, right? And they have applied the tape that holds the pad together to this front page instead of just printing this twice, which basically affects the paintability of this page. And I don't understand why somebody didn't catch that. Okay, I ran into another problem. So I had planned on using her palette that I purchased from her site for at least the first project. And you only need 2 colors for the first project because it's a color mixing project. You need phthalo blue and quin magenta. And, well, we have something that could kind of pass for a phthalo blue, although they're all renamed, but there's nothing that could pass for a quin magenta for this project. So I'm going to put her palette aside and I am going to go ahead and switch over to the RE5. That's not a great start, especially since she said at the front of her book that she uses her palette. And yeah. Okay, anyway, so we're going to use the Artify instead. So I actually need to make a palette map for this because it's been a really long time since I've used it. So next time you see me, hopefully we can start painting this project. So I'm a big fan of taping down my pieces. If you guys have watched my videos, you guys see I believe in stretching my watercolors, taping them down. That's never an argument from me. And that is something she suggests in the book. In fact, she recommends it. One of my problems though is that these are printed edge to edge. So you are going to lose some. For this illustration here, that's not a big deal. But if they had been printed with like a border, even like a 1/4 inch border, then you could tape it and not risk losing some of the illustration. So she did say we could use any colors that we like, but I liked her suggested combo of magenta and phthalo. I think those make for really beautiful purples. The sloppiness on this is my own fault. I don't have the right size brush in my stash. I rarely paint with angled brushes, and I'm in the middle of a Sjogren's flare-up, and my hand joints are giving me a lot of issues. The exercise was easy to follow and relaxing. I struggled to get the paint concentration right, and this is more due to using student grade. If I were using a professional grade like she was using, it would be more saturated. So if you tell people to use your brand of paints, they're going to be disappointed when you're comparing the results. And I think this is a very gentle start for beginners to help them actually start painting. The included paper was not great at taking this much water, but to be fair, my brush was over wet, so I probably dumped too much water on the paper. know about you guys, but this is probably one of my favorite parts of the Easily Influenced. I love looking at other artists' social media presences. I like looking at how they handle themselves, what they choose to use, what they choose not to use, how they set up their websites. I love all that kind of stuff. Now, unfortunately for the Rebel Unicorn, there is a book by a very similar name and also a lot of art on Etsy that looks like it's generative AI. So honestly, that really sucks. It always sucks when somebody else has diluted your brand. People have asked me for years, why natto soup? But that doesn't happen with me. So we're going to start with her YouTube channel. And she has buku subscribers. I'm kind of wondering how long she has been on YouTube. I don't know if YouTube will actually make that public. It does! October 2013. Then we have our curated playlists over here. It looks like everything is pretty much in shorts format, which I know a lot of people find is very accessible. It is not my preferred format to make educational content for. I really struggle. You know, you guys know I talk too much. I really struggle to like curate it down. But everything looks very cute and very approachable and very fun. Lots of very cute techniques. These look like they might be longer format videos, especially like the watercolor techniques and the Dollar Tree watercolors. There's a mix of, you know, from a while back as well as more recent. And I feel like I first found out about her work on TikTok. Sometimes with artists, it's very easy for me to tell where like the bulk of their popularity is, where the bulk of their fan base watches their stuff. And then sometimes I have, or consumes their stuff, I should say. Sometimes I have a harder time being able to tell. So because I am struggling with a flare-up today, I'm not necessarily going to be as verbose as normal. Also, I'm just trying to like pare down the length of time. But I did want to check out, you know, what's going on her social media and be able to include that with today's review. I do think that it actually provides a lot of context. I probably won't be able to do as much analysis and like talking about what I think works and what doesn't and what I like and what is not necessarily for me. Mostly because since I'm not feeling well, it actually kind of undermines my ability to like filter my thoughts appropriately, and I don't want to say anything stupid. This is her Patreon. Oh my gosh, my computer is having a lot of trouble today. So it looks like she has a lot of really great content up on Patreon. So if you want to support her work, that could be an excellent way to do that. I was actually kind of hoping her Linktree would have more of her social media links, so I may have to go all the way back. But these are the materials that she uses in her book. That's pretty neat. I'm sure she linked that in one of the QR codes, and I'm just being kind of silly. So you can see these are all professional grade watercolors that she's using in the book. And, this is actually, yes, Stonehenge. Okay, so Stonehenge is a cotton rag paper. So not only is she using professional grade paints, but she is also using a cotton rag paper. The paper included with the book is not a cotton rag paper. One of the things that I'd like to point out as somebody who is going through the book right now is it is really helpful when the materials are one-to-one. That way you're not blaming yourself when things don't work out similarly to what the artist who is in the teaching artist is presenting to you. I find that both beneficial as an in-person teacher as well as a YouTube teacher. You know, you just got to try to keep it one-to-one. I realize though that that's really difficult to do. It is a challenge to find printers to print on watercolor paper. And printing on cotton rag is really expensive, so you know, I understand that. I'm actually suggesting that for the book she had printed on the paper that was going to be used for the book. I was thinking like a TikTok or an Instagram would come up. Even DuckDuckGo has gotten like almost unusable for search results that you know exist. And I tend to like just like searching the artist names because I like to see what comes up organically, because that's how a lot of people might find that artist to begin with. So this is her shop. I'm not sure if she still has the original palette that I bought. I bought it in a bundle, and I think I bought it during a sale. Sometimes that's really the only way I can afford to do these kind of things. A lot of the things I see on her site are things, as somebody who has reviewed a lot of AliExpress art supplies and a lot of Chinese art supplies, they're very familiar to me. I recognize them. Yeah, I guess she's not selling the little set anymore, although the larger set looks like it contains the colors in the little set and then more. And it looks like, I think I understood from her Patreon that she's discontinuing her handmade watercolors, which, believe me, I understand as somebody who has made handmade watercolors for fun with a friend. It's extremely time consuming and, you know, possibly not worth it to do unless that's something that you really want to focus on. People keep suggesting that I should offer handmade watercolors for sale, and I'm like, absolutely not. I have two pets that would be. I have particulate problems due to Sjogren's, like inhaling small particulates causes a lot of problems for me, and I have small pets in the house. I don't think that's a good fit for me. I am going to give this one more shot to see if I can pull up, I mean, there's the listing for her book, but I was looking to see if it would pull up kind of anything. Yeah, it's kind of a shame because Rebel Unicorn is actually used by a few other things, so it does make it a little bit more challenging to specifically find her. I think I'm going to stop after Instagram though. And she has some really beautiful watercolor projects and ideas, some very inspiring ones. And that's a super cute idea with the masking tape and then the wet into wet and then you pull it apart. That's really adorable for patterns. So yeah, I can definitely see why she's so popular. She has a lot of really accessible short form videos to get you inspired. And she has a fairly large backlog. Her art style is approachable and very bright and colorful and fun. And then, of course, she's definitely got like her own personal branding going, so it makes it easy to recognize her. All right, so cool. Let us hop back over to the desktop then. Next, we're doing Hot and Cold Mountains. This is another fun and easy project. It doesn't take a lot of finesse or skill to achieve a decent painting, so this is perfect for beginner painters. The projects in general seem to take around 20 minutes or so. Your dry time is going to vary that a whole lot. So if you have like 20 extra minutes here and there throughout your evening, it could be great to kind of pick through these projects. Next is the project Golden Hour. I love the concept behind this one. I've done several tutorials on this theme, it's so easy and it delivers a punch, but the paper is such a bad fit for this much water. Now, the palette that I'm using doesn't have a Paints gray, and neither does the one of hers that I own. So I'm going to use black instead. And she mentions rotating the paper to get the best angles. I feel like I've seen very few of the influential artists that we've looked at mention that in their books, but this is so important, and it's honestly kind of challenging to demonstrate on YouTube because people will get kind of motion sick from watching you flip and flop your paper. But really, that is the best way to get those angles, and I'm so glad she mentioned it. The next tutorial I wanted to try is peony, since I paint a lot of florals and I figured this would be really fun for me. This is probably the most time-consuming project, and my peony ended up pretty sloppy. The paper is not a great choice for this sort of wet into wet project, and mine definitely looked a lot more messy than hers. Painting someone else's art, especially somebody else's floral art, is always weird and kind of fun. I did the first 4 of these in one day, and then this one just took so long that I decided to save the rest for another day. So I did try out more of her tutorials because I was just really enjoying painting along with her and trying out some different techniques and, thinking about color and painting a little bit different from how I usually do. And I found that because these printouts were included with the book, it really does make it more accessible to just sit down and try something rather than me spending the time to draw something out and paint it and feel like I can't really share it because it's really somebody else's art or somebody else's concept. So this made experimenting so much easier and more accessible for me. It is a brand new day and I am starting with the Any Season wreath. And I really like this because it is a brushwork practice. The sort of brushwork that, if you guys watch these Lily Influence series, you see I do a lot of like loose florals. I do a lot of like this kind of brush painting because it's a skill I don't have and I'm terrible at it and I want to get better at it. And I found that her printout made it so much easier to just focus on the brush strokes. And I really wish more of the floral painters who do these kind of books would do exactly this, because it makes it so much easier to just take a deep breath and follow along and not get over worried about it. So that would be my recommendation. Is I love this kind of thing, and it makes it so much more accessible. The paper does dry too fast to allow for the wet into wet technique she should see to allow for the wet into wet techniques that she suggests, but I'm just kind of doing my own thing with the wet into wet. This was easy and fun, and usually my brushwork is terrible, so the printout really went a long way to making this project accessible for me. So next is What a Gem, and I decided to switch over to Da Vinci professional grade watercolors to see if a professional grade watercolor palette would help with the colors in the blending, since I was kind of dissatisfied with how the Supervision watercolor, I think Supervision, it might be Superior watercolors, sorry, were handling on this paper. So I really wanted to give it kind of a best shot, so I switched over to some nicer paints. Unfortunately, the colors still dry desaturated on this paper. The dry times are unpredictable and uneven. Water evaporates immediately or pools on this cellulose paper, which for a beginner painter would be very frustrating and would make it difficult to kind of gauge how much time the project is going to take, or how much energy the project is going to take, or even what the final result is going to look like. That said, I still find that the printouts and the instructions make painting along very, very easy. The real problem is just the paper. And as a watercolor artist who has been looking into working with someone to print my line arts on watercolor paper at an affordable price that I can sell in my shop for years now, I know how difficult it is to find that Goldilocks. So me complaining about the paper is kind of a negligible thing, especially because she includes a QR code at the front of the book. So you could print and pencil your own if you want to. And I really love that about this book. There's a lot of books that have included templates, and I really like that as well. I think that's super accessible. I love that this one already has these things pre-printed for you if you want to get started right away. Or if you find yourself struggling with the paper, you can invest in a nicer paper and print them out and then paint them on the nicer paper. I love that you have that flexibility. This doesn't dry yet, I'm aware. Mine doesn't look anything like hers. I'll show you hers. Give me a sec. That's hers. And there's probably, every artist handles things differently, different paints, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But the main difference is she is working on what seems to be a cotton rag paper. Stonehenge does also make, actually no, Stonehenge just does the cotton rag in watercolor paper. I was thinking fluid there for a second, but no, Stonehenge is just cotton rag. In fact, it's a really thirsty cotton rag that I used to paint on a lot before I switched printers. I used to really like Stonehenge. So she's working on a very thirsty, absorbent cotton rag, and what came with the book is a very thin cellulose with just a texture on it. So they are completely different papers. Now, this is less noticeable, although not entirely ignorable, with the illustrations that don't require as much wet into wet, but for the ones that are really wet into wet heavy, it is super noticeable. It just handles completely differently. Now, For an experienced painter, we know this, we can look at this, we can make adjustments, or we can just laugh and say, hey, I wasn't having a great day. But for somebody who's newer to watercolor, who purchased this book, take her advice about downloading the line arts using the QR code and print them out on your own watercolor paper. I think I have I've shared instructions here on the channel many times on how I print out blue lines. You could also bring it to a copy shop and have them print it out using their toner printer, and toner will be waterproof. Or you can print it out on plain copy paper, flip it over, cover that side in graphite, and do a graphite transfer. And I'm pretty sure I have tutorials on how to do graphite transfers. She may have tutorials on how to do graphite transfers. That is the best way to achieve results similar to hers. I really don't think you could achieve anything remotely similar to what she did in the book using her palette. I may go back and find an illustration and try to recreate it. Kind of depends on when this dries. And I mean, we handle things differently. Like, she uses a heat gun to speed up her times. I actually really don't like that. I find that it makes my pigments turn kind of chalky. So I don't use a heat gun, and I rarely use a hair dryer. I also live in an area that is, I'm in the US. I think she's in Australia. I live in Louisiana. It is super humid here. So that can definitely affect things too, because I find that blowing heat often just moves pigments around because it's so humid in the air. We also have air conditioning, and we also have as part of air conditioning, it does do some dehumidifying. We do have a house dehumidifier. I don't run it because honestly it is 33% humidity in here right now. So, you know, just differences. But the paper is terrible. I know there is an adage that if you watch my channel, you probably know how I feel about the adage. It's a poor artist who blames their tools. I review art supplies because I disagree with that adage. The paper is not good. The paper is pretty bad. So, you know, I only critique it so harshly because it did come with the book. It was one of the reasons the book was delayed, and also because what you're going to be able to achieve due to dry times is very different from what she was able to achieve. And one of the big things that bothers me with kits, with books, is when you set your customers, you set your students up for failure. And I do kind of feel like with the paper being so different from the paper she's using, it's not intentional, but I do think it kind of sets your students up for failure. They are going to have a much harder time recreating these really beautiful, delicate wet into wets on a paper like this that is no thicker than cardstock, that is just not receptive to water that way. And, you know, through the course of the Easily Influenced, I've learned that I prefer to blame the publisher rather than the artist. And in the case of Lacey, I definitely would prefer to blame the publisher because, you know, from everything that I've seen, she's a skilled teacher. She's good at explaining things. She's good at making art accessible to a variety of people. She utilizes a format that a lot of people find to be extremely accessible, i.e. shorts and short form content. So I would way rather blame the publisher than blame her for some of these issues. So I'm going to let this dry, and I'm going to go back and select a very simple, I really want to avoid wet and wet with the paints I bought from her shop. I really don't care for the paints that I bought from her shop. But I think I did almost all of the ones that are so easy that I would be comfortable doing. So I may do Agave Sunset. No, it's got a, well, it doesn't have quite the right color. You know what? It is better for me to try and fail and you guys see it than for us to not try, right? Okay. All right. So we're going to finish with Agave Sunset, and we are going to finish using her palette that I purchased from her shop. So this is the final project that we're going to be doing. The final test is Agave Sunset. I am testing this out with her watercolor palette. So one of the things that really kind of surprised me is that her paints show up the best on this paper of the 3 brands that I've used, even though I know I would hate painting with them in any regular context. The pink is basically just nothing. As soon as you add water, the color falls apart. And you'll see that when I start coloring in the background, because I am actually following along with her instructions as she does it, as she writes them out. If it were me, I would actually do the background first. So it's interesting to work from somebody else's way of thinking and kind of get into somebody else's head and do their order of operations rather than my own. However, I kind of liked how the colors mixed and how the colors blended. I had to use my own best guesses because her book lists different color names than what is in her palette, and she doesn't offer like, you know, if you're using my palette, use these colors. And I'm pretty experienced with watercolor and pretty experienced with color mixing, so that wasn't really a big deal for me, but a less confident painter might find that to be a bit of a struggle. And I only really mention that because she mentions using her own paints to paint, so I do think that could have been just like a helpful inclusion. And frankly, she may have mentioned it in like the videos. As I mentioned before, I just did not watch them. I'm sorry. It's not about her. It's about my own learning style and my own preferences. If I actually want to follow along with a tutorial, I need written steps to be able to do that generally. So this is really what's best for my learning style. That's one of the reasons I review so many books. But if you learn better from video, you do have those options. So in general, her instruction is fine. On more complicated tutorials like this, bullet points would be helpful, and breaking the text up into more pages with large photos would be great. But that's an editor-publisher thing, and Quattro isn't great at that. I think watching the video first would make it easier to follow along, but I'm stubborn. The paper is the biggest issue in my opinion. For simpler techniques like this, it's fine, but it starts to become annoying with wet-to-wet techniques. It just won't behave like a cotton rag, or like the cotton rag that she's using in the photos. So my big complaint there is I do wish either she had used the paper that this book was going to come with, and that way the photos would match what you're able to reproduce. Or, I mean, she does mention that she uses Stonehenge, and she does mention that there's a QR code so you can print it out yourself. But I do think making it clearer that this is great, like the paper that came with it is good for practice. But if you want to do a nicer version of this where the colors are more saturated and the wet-to-wet is a little more dreamy and soft, a cotton rag paper would be a better choice for that. It's not really her fault though, and I really do appreciate that she included these printouts. I love watercolor books that make painting easier and accessible to more people, and I do think that this goes a long way towards that. So let's talk about the pros and cons, and we're going to start with the watercolor palette. And I'm going to go ahead and pull the agave up since that's what I did with this palette. So we did a lot of painting today. Okay, so this is not my preferred type of watercolor. I don't really like dye-based watercolor. I prefer like generally mineral-based watercolor. It was fine to paint along with the book. In fact, I was surprised by what it was able to achieve on this paper, but I don't have any use for it outside of that. I think there are better student grade options available if you're interested in learning how to paint on a budget, but the superior paints that I grabbed were not it either. I would recommend Melian pigments. I've used them many times here on the channel. I can link some reviews. That to me would be the sweet spot for student grade for something like this. If you want to support her financially, you can do so through her Patreon, through her Amazon affiliates, and those are listed as her Amazon favorites, or by purchasing her cute art supply inspired stickers or her book. I would not recommend the white labeled watercolors. So what about Lacey Walker's Learn to Watercolor This Book? 20 step-by-step beginner-friendly lessons on watercolor paper. So first of all, we're going to start with the pros, and I think it actually does what it says it's going to do. I do think it's beginner-friendly. I like that there are lessons, but there are also projects, and I like that. You're going to end up with art that if you like it, you could put it up on your wall. It actually looks like something, and the ideas themselves are, in general, very cute, and, you know, something that you could be proud of with the execution, depending on how much time you put into it. You could even print these out onto your own watercolor paper and do something a little bit more elaborate if you'd like. And I really love that flexibility about it. So I really appreciate that this watercolor book actually delivers on the promises that so many watercolor books make. These are cute projects that build upon one another and utilize straightforward techniques. You can tell Lacey is a teacher by how she approaches many of these things, whether it's multimodal teaching with video and then written instructions, or the way she breaks things down, or the way she tries to include more step-by-step photos. My issues, which we'll talk about in a minute with this book, are mostly on the Quattro side of things. I like that the watercolor paper comes with the line arts included. It takes away blank page paralysis. And honestly, I feel like I needed this today. My hands have been really bothering me. I mentioned that earlier. While I can draw, I don't really want to draw straight on paper. But I did kind of feel like painting. I wanted to do something relaxing today. And being able to paint these projects without having to draw them kind of freed that up. Drawing and painting use different muscles, different flexibility in the hand, and for me painting's a little bit easier. So I really appreciated that these were already drawn, making it that much easier. The projects are also very approachable. They're very beginner friendly. They have decent impact without them being really difficult. So I really love that she seemed to have thought that through. The QR codes in the book link to printable line arts as well, just like I mentioned, as well as video tutorials that demonstrate the techniques and the projects. I really love that. With some of the other art influencers / influential artists who teach on YouTube or TikTok or what have you, I've often lamented that they don't include links to their outside work. Like, here's a link to that tutorial. I love that this does that. I think it makes it really approachable. The projects in general don't take super long to paint. The shortest ones, it's about 20 minutes. Really, what's going to make this take a long time is the drying time and the paper that you're using. So I love that these are kind of bite-sized projects that, like, if you had an hour one evening, you could paint one of these. And I love how approachable that is. So what about the cons? The paper is not the paper that she uses in the book. I know I mentioned that a lot, but finished pieces are going to look different to very different depending on the techniques used. I mean, we have this here on the cover. This is mine. You know, I did use different paints, but they're pretty substantially different because this paper is just not capable of some of these techniques. You're just not going to get the soft, blendy, wet into wet techniques on this paper. It's just not really capable of doing that. So if you're painting along, I recommend utilizing her download link for the line arts. Also, because of the included paper, the book itself is very unwieldy. It takes up a lot of space. It's very hard to keep it open while you're working. You're going to want some paperweights or clamps, something like that. But frankly, I think those are kind of small potato problems considering some of the problems that I've had with art books or art supplies in the Easily Influenced series in the past. Now, like I said, I don't really recommend her paints. They're not really for me. I'm not a fan of semi-art watercolors, but she's not charging a... Knowing what I know about white labeling, she's definitely charging a markup on it, but, you know, people, you know, it's part of earning a profit, part of running a business. And frankly, when you teach art on the internet, you're not making buku money necessarily. So, you know, girl, get your bag. I wouldn't recommend these. I would love to see her partner with another company. Maybe even like Da Vinci. I know she's in Australia, but like Da Vinci does partnerships, something like that, and offer something higher quality. I know that's going to price her out of the beginner demographic, but, and that's just my opinion. So, you know, take it with like a grain of salt, you know. So like as a reviewer, no, I don't recommend her paints, but I do recommend her book and I really enjoyed it. And if you are interested in getting started with watercolor and you want a very easy way to get started, this could be a fantastic entry point. So I really enjoyed this book. While I have some
quibbles with how the information is presented. I have no problems with the actual information at all, and I will happily chalk those issues up to the publisher and the editor and not Lacey herself. I really enjoyed that it does come with printouts in the back of the book, so you can start painting basically immediately if you have paints and brushes on hand. One of my problems though is that the paper in the book is not the paper she's using to present these, and sometimes the difference in how the colors look can be pretty substantial. So if you're not familiar with watercolor, you might blame yourself, or you might find this a little bit disappointing. So even a disclaimer in the book that different papers are going to have different properties and are going to handle paint differently. And I do believe she does talk about the difference somewhat, but making it very clear that the paper that this book comes with versus the paper that she's using, that would be very helpful. However, this book is in print. We cannot change time. We cannot go back in time. That is a suggestion should there be a second edition. In general, I would recommend this book. I would recommend this to my teenage students interested in watercolor. I would recommend this to adult artists who are interested in getting into watercolor. I think the combination of text and videos makes this extremely approachable. I think the photo choices she includes are great. They show you how she's handling the brush. I love that. And I really appreciate that she included a photo of her setup. It's taken so long to see that. I would have loved to see her sketchbook, to see her ideation, to see how she plans these sort of things, but it wasn't that kind of a book. It is a project-driven book. So if you are interested in a project-driven watercolor book, this is a fantastic place to start. I was not as impressed by her paints. That could be me. It could be the style of paints that they are. It could be that I am becoming a bit of a paint snob, if you will. So if you like Lacey Walker stuff, if you like the Rebel Unicorn stuff, I really do recommend this book. I think it would make a phenomenal gift for an emerging artist in your life, or a gift for yourself if you enjoy her work and you would like to support it. I apologize for the lighting in this shot. The top light went out and I am short. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you guys again soon with another art supply review, or perhaps another tutorial. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye guys.